You want to succeed. Obviously, you want the better job, the better body, the better relationship, the better life. You know what you need to do? You make a plan. You start strong. And then right when things are actually working, right when you can see the finish line, you mysteriously start messing it up. You stop showing up, you procrastinate, you pick a fight. You self-destruct. Why would anyone do this? Here's a claim that should disturb you. In one study, people voluntarily chose to make themselves worse at a test just so they'd have an excuse ready if they failed. Think about that. They preferred handicapping their own performance to facing judgment without a safety net. This is self-handicapping, and understanding it might explain the bizarre ways you've torpedoed your own progress. Let's break it down. Picture this. You finally buy that gym membership. You've been talking about it for months. You go 3 times the first week. You're feeling good. Then week 2 comes around. You skip Monday because work was crazy. You skip Wednesday because you're tired. By Friday, you've convinced yourself you'll start fresh next month. Or this, you've been seeing someone for a few months. It's going well, really well. They text back immediately. They remember the small things. And suddenly you start picking fights over nothing. You become distant. You find flaws that didn't bother you before. Or this, you've been working on a project for months. You're almost done. The finish line is right there, and you just stop. You tell yourself you need to rethink the approach. You open new documents. You do everything except finish. What's happening here? You genuinely wanted the fitness, the relationship, the completed project. You invested time and money. You have the capability. So why retreat right when success is visible? In 1978, psychologists Stephen Berglas and Edward Jones ran an experiment. They had participants take a problem-solving test, then gave everyone success feedback regardless of performance. Then came the twist. Participants chose between 2 drugs before taking a similar test. One drug supposedly enhanced performance. The other supposedly impaired it. People who received success that felt unearned, who didn't know why they succeeded, chose the performance-impairing drug at significantly higher rates. Let that land. They voluntarily handicapped themselves. They chose to make their performance worse. Why? Because if they failed, they could blame the drug, and if they succeeded despite the drug, they looked even more capable. Either way, their ego had an escape route. This is self-handicapping, creating or claiming obstacles that let you externalize failure while internalizing success. Behavioral self-handicapping is when you actively undermine your performance. You procrastinate on the report that determines your promotion. You stay out drinking before the presentation. You don't prepare for the interview. You ghost the person you actually like. Claim self-handicapping is when you invoke obstacles without necessarily creating them. You mention you didn't sleep well. You say you've been so stressed lately. You claim a vague injury. You're setting up the narrative before the performance happens. Both serve the same function. They provide a ready-made excuse if things go wrong, and they make any success look more impressive by comparison. Your ego doesn't care about your long-term happiness. It cares about your short-term self-image. When you face a situation where your ability might be judged, there's uncertainty. You might succeed. You might fail. Failure threatens your sense of competence. But if you fail and you have an excuse, the failure doesn't say anything about your underlying ability. The ego survives. This is why relationships self-destruct right when they're getting serious. The gym membership dies right when you're seeing progress. The job application stalls right before submission. Success brings exposure. Exposure brings the possibility of being found out. Here's where self-handicapping gets tangled up with both identity and how we manage other people's perceptions. If you succeed at the gym, you become a fit person. That's a new identity with expectations. You have to keep going. People will notice if you stop. If you succeed in the relationship, you become someone in a committed partnership. That means vulnerability, interdependence, the possibility of being hurt in new ways. If you've spent years identifying as someone who's bad at sticking to things, or someone who always messes up relationships, then becoming successful threatens that entire self-concept. Your brain doesn't know who this new person is. It's destabilizing. And there's a social component. When you claim an obstacle, telling people you didn't prepare, you're sick, you're dealing with something, you're managing their expectations. If you fail, people won't blame your ability. If you succeed, they'll be impressed. But here's the catch. Research shows that people don't like self-handicappers. Studies where participants observe someone using self-handicapping strategies find that the handicapper is rated as less competent, less likable, less trustworthy. The strategy that protects your ego can damage your reputation. Other people aren't fooled. They recognize the behavior, even if they don't know the term for it. Self-handicapping is closely related to the imposter phenomenon, a persistent feeling that you're not as competent as others think you are, and that you'll eventually be exposed as a fraud. When you feel like an imposter, success feels like a trap. Every achievement raises the bar. Every positive evaluation increases the pressure. You don't internalize success. You think you got lucky, or fooled people, or were in the right place at the right time. Imposter feelings make self-handicapping extremely tempting. If you sabotage yourself, you control the narrative, you're not exposed as a fraud by someone else, you remove yourself from the situation on your own terms. The gym membership dies because you're not sure you deserve to be fit. The relationship cools because you're not sure you're lovable. The job application stalls because you're not sure you're qualified. The handicap is a preemptive strike against a rejection that feels inevitable. A 2022 meta-analysis pulled together 159 studies, looking at over 81,000 participants. The strongest predictors of self-handicapping weren't situational, they were personality traits. People high in neuroticism showed a correlation of 0.38 with self-handicapping. That's substantial. People low in conscientiousness showed a correlation of -0.40. Also substantial. Fear of failure showed a correlation of 0.39. Low self-esteem showed -4.34. And fear of success was just as relevant as fear of failure. What does a correlation of 0.38 mean in practical terms? It means there's a meaningful relationship, the kind where, if you took two groups of people, one high in neuroticism and one low, you'd see a noticeable difference in how much they self-handicap. It's not a small effect. It's the kind of pattern that shows up consistently across studies. Fear of success isn't fear of nice things happening. It's fear of what success requires you to become. The new identity, the new expectations, the visibility, the maintenance. Here's why self-handicapping is seductive. It works, temporarily. Studies show that self-handicappers often experience a more positive mood after creating a handicap, even if they go on to fail. The ego is protected. The failure is explainable. But the same research found that chronic self-handicapping predicts worse performance over time, poorer adjustment, and increased depression. When you make a habit of creating obstacles, you train yourself to avoid tests rather than take them. You erode your own trust and your ability to follow through. And you never get the data that would actually prove you're capable. You fear you're not good enough. So you self-handicap, so you perform worse, which confirms you're not good enough, which increases the fear, which increases self-handicapping. The gym membership doesn't work out. You tell yourself you're bad at sticking to things? That belief makes the next attempt even less likely to work. You're gathering evidence for your own inadequacy, evidence that you created by sabotaging the test. Who does this? Everyone, to some degree. But people with unstable self-esteem that rises and falls dramatically, are especially prone. People with high fear of failure and high fear of success self-handicap more. People with low self-efficacy, belief in their capacity to succeed, self-handicap more. And there's a gender difference. Men are more likely to engage in behavioral self-handicapping, actually doing things that impair performance, while women are more likely to engage in claim. Self-handicapping, citing obstacles like illness or stress, the social cost of being seen as not trying is higher for women, on average. Here are some real-life examples. Career. You've been at your job for 3 years. There's an opening for promotion. You're qualified. Your manager has hinted you should apply, but you keep delaying. You tell yourself you need more experience first. You let the application window close. Applying would mean being evaluated. Potential rejection. If you got it, you'd have to prove you belonged. Dating. You match with someone great. The conversation flows. They ask to meet up. You take days to respond. You make vague plans and cancel. Meeting up would make this real. It would mean the possibility of connection, and therefore hurt. So you create distance. Creative work. You've been writing a book for 2 years. You're 80% done. You keep rewriting earlier chapters. You research new directions. Finishing would mean releasing it into the world, being judged. So you stay in revision mode, a form of self-handicapping that looks like perfectionism, but functions as avoidance. Fitness. The gym membership dies. You buy expensive equipment. You research the perfect program. You do everything except the actual work. Doing the work would mean testing yourself, discovering you're not as naturally gifted as you hoped. So you stay in preparation mode. The people most prone to self-handicapping are often the ones who care the most about succeeding. If you didn't care, you wouldn't need an excuse. You just fail and move on. But if you care deeply, if your self-worth is wrapped up in this outcome, then failure isn't just an outcome. It's an indictment. The more you care, the more threatening the test becomes, and the more tempting the handicap. The only way out is to let the test happen, to risk failure without a built-in excuse, to find out what you're actually capable of. I know that sounds overwhelming. The whole point of self-handicapping is to avoid exactly this. Letting the test happen means removing your safety net. It means facing the possibility of failure without an escape route. It means doing the thing you've been avoiding. But here's what actually helps. Notice the pattern. Recognize when you're creating obstacles or pulling back right when things are working. Lower the stakes. The gym membership feels huge. What if success didn't mean becoming a fitness influencer, but just showing up twice a week? What if the job application didn't mean your entire career, but just one opportunity? Separate performance from identity. When you fail at something, it doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you failed at that thing. Outcomes are information, not verdicts. Tolerate discomfort. Self-handicapping is an anxiety avoidance strategy. The antidote is to tolerate the anxiety rather than avoid it. Show up. Feel the fear. Do it anyway. Nothing catastrophic happens. Repeat. Focus on mastery, not performance. Research shows that people focused on mastery goals, learning and improving, self-handicap less than those focused on performance goals, proving and performing. When failure is part of the learning process rather than a judgment of your worth, the stakes feel lower. Build self-efficacy through small wins. People with higher belief in their capacity to succeed self-handicap less. You build this not by setting impossible goals, but by setting slightly challenging goals, achieving them, and accumulating evidence that you can follow through. Shift your identity slowly. You won't become a fit person overnight, but you can become someone who exercises once, then twice. The identity shift happens through accumulated evidence, not declaration. Researchers use the term psychological glass ceiling to describe invisible barriers people create for themselves. Limits you place on your own potential because exceeding them would require confronting the anxiety of success. You perform well enough to be competent, but not so well that expectations skyrocket. You stay in a zone that feels safe. You're good, but not great. Employed, but not promoted. Dating, but not committed. Trying, but not quite succeeding. This ceiling protects you. It maintains plausible deniability. I could have gone further, but I chose not to. It's a narrative of potential rather than a record of performance. And potential is comfortable. Potential doesn't reject you. Potential doesn't require maintenance. Potential just sits there glowing, forever unrealized. Self-sabotage isn't self-destruction. It's self-protection. Your brain isn't trying to ruin your life. It's trying to protect you from a perceived threat. The threat of being exposed, of failing publicly, of becoming someone you don't know how to be yet. The problem is that the protection prevents growth. The gym membership stays unused. The relationship stays distant. The job stays the same. You stay safe. You stay small. You stay exactly who you've always been. When you actually test yourself, you get data. Real evidence. You learn that you can survive failure. You learn that failure isn't catastrophic. You learn that your ego is more resilient than you thought. And sometimes you learn that you're more capable than you gave yourself credit for. The gym membership isn't just about fitness. It's about proving to yourself that you can follow through. The relationship isn't just about love. It's about proving that you can be vulnerable and survive. The job application isn't just about career. It's about proving that rejection doesn't define you. Let's quickly recap. Self-handicapping is creating obstacles to protect your ego from potential failure. People have chosen to handicap their own performance just to have excuses ready. 2 forms: behavioral undermining performance and claimed, citing obstacles, strongly tied to neuroticism, low conscientiousness, fear of failure, low self-esteem, and fear of success, short-term, relief and ego protection, long-term, worse performance and eroded self-trust. Fear of success drives it as much as fear of failure. Success threatens identity. The strategy backfires socially. Self-handicappers are judged negatively by others. Breaking the cycle. Notice patterns. Lower stakes. Focus on mastery. Build identity through small wins. If this video helped you understand why you keep pulling back right when things start working, hit like. It tells the algorithm this is worth showing to more people. Subscribe if you want more psychology that explains the baffling things your brain does. And here's the real question. What's one test you've been avoiding because failing without an excuse feels worse than failing with one? Drop it in the comments, not as a confession, but as a recognition. Sometimes naming the pattern is the first crack in the glass ceiling.